The first thing I noticed that Sunday was that my chair was already taken, not moved back an inch by accident, not borrowed for a minute. Taken. Brent was sitting in it with his forearms on my table like he'd been there long enough to settle in, and there were 2 manila folders laid out between the salt shaker and Nell's blue-rimmed butter dish where the serving bowls ought to have been. The roast beef was in the oven. I could smell onions, black pepper, and that sweet burnt-edge gravy gets when it's been left to think about itself a little too long. Everything in the house said Sunday. Everything at the table said something else. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room with one hand still on the screen door handle from the porch. Out back, the maple leaves were just starting to turn, and I'd been looking at them the way I always did this time of year, half for the color. And half because Nell planted that tree when Claire was 6 and told me a house ought to have one thing growing older with it on purpose. Dad, Claire said, bright as a church hostess. There you are. She was carrying the Pyrex casserole dish with scalloped potatoes, the old yellow one with the tiny chip near the handle. Her hair was pinned up in the neat way she wore it when she was headed somewhere she expected people to notice her. She set the dish down, wiped her palms on a dish towel, and smiled at me too quickly. Evan was leaning by the counter with a can of Coke in one hand. He gave me a look I couldn't quite place. Not warning, not exactly. More like the look a man gives when he's already been in a room too long and doesn't know whether to leave or stay put and watch it get worse. I nodded once and came in slow. Smells good, I said. It should, Claire said. I've been at it all morning. That was another small thing. Claire never cooked roast beef. She ordered food, assembled things, kept labels facing front in her refrigerator. When she did cook it was because there was a reason bigger than hunger. Brent got up when he saw me looking at the chair, but not in the right way. He pushed himself off the seat slowly, smiling with that closed-mouth politeness of his, like he was doing me the courtesy of remembering the room had an owner. "Sorry, Tom," he said. "I was just going over a couple things." "A couple things." I looked at the folders. One had my last name printed on a tab in Brent's square accountant handwriting. Mercer. As if I needed a label to know what family I was in. "That's so," I said. Claire stepped in before the silence had a chance to settle where it belonged. "Why don't you sit over here, Dad?" She put her hand on the back of the chair at the far end of the table. Not my chair by the window that faced the yard. Not the place I'd sat for 28 years first with Nell across from me, and then alone after she passed, still looking out at the bird feeder she used to keep stocked. The far end closer to the kitchen beneath the vent that clicked on and off every few minutes. It'll be easier for you to hear everybody. There are insults that come at you with their teeth out, and then there are the other kind. The second kind are worse when they come from your own child. They arrive in a soft sweater carrying hot food. I stood there another second, maybe 2, with the smell of roast beef in the room and that yellow casserole dish steaming on the table, and Brent already sliding one of the folders an inch to the side so it wouldn't be in the way of the serving spoon. I sat where she told me to. You get to my age, you learn that fighting too soon can make people feel correct before they've had to prove anything. Old men who flare up fast get explained away just as fast. I'd seen it happen in waiting rooms at the bank and hospital halls. Somebody talks too loud to you too slow, and if you answer with too much heat, suddenly the problem becomes your tone instead of theirs. Claire moved around the kitchen with her back very straight. Brent sat back down, though not all the way in my chair, this time more on the edge of it like he was trying to make the first thing look smaller by changing how he held the second. Evan cracked open his Coke and took one swallow too many. I looked at the table. The good plates were out. The cloth napkins, too, the ones Nell bought at Lazarus years ago after Christmas when they'd been marked down. The little silver gravy boat sat beside the stove waiting to be filled. And right in the middle of all that Sunday, right in the place where the platter should have gone, were those folders. Claire brought the roast in and set it down with a small breath through her nose. "Well," she said, "this looks nice." Nobody answered that. I used to think silence had one sound. It doesn't. There's ordinary, quiet, tired, quiet, full belly quiet, snow quiet. Then there's this kind. This kind sits in the room ahead of you and waits. Brent cleared his throat. "Before we eat, maybe we could just go over a few things while everyone's here." I looked at him. "Few things." Nothing dramatic, Claire said quickly. We just thought it made sense. There it was again, we. I reached for my water glass. It was already poured. Claire always used to ask first whether I wanted tea or water or coffee with Sunday lunch, even after I'd been drinking plain ice water with the meal since 1987. Today the glass was there waiting for me half full, as if someone had decided ahead of time what I needed and in what amount. What makes sense, I asked. Claire sat down across from me, not Nell's seat, but one over from it. She folded her hands, then unfolded them and straightened the edge of the top folder. Dad, don't make that face. What face is that? The one where you act like everybody's attacking you before anybody's said anything. Evan looked down at his can. Brent gave a little smile that never reached his eyes. I felt the first clean sting of it then. Not the folders, not even the chair. That sentence, familiar as a screwdriver handle in the hand. Claire had been using versions of it since she was 16 and figured out that if you said a person was overreacting before they reacted, half the room would believe you. I asked a question, I said. Brent leaned forward, forearms on the table again. Tom, this is really just about making things simpler going forward. For who? For everybody. That word landed wrong, too. Claire lifted the serving knife and began slicing the roast before anyone had bowed heads or passed plates. You've had a lot on you, she said. The house, the yard, all the paperwork since Mom passed. And some of the trust language is outdated anyway. I looked up at her. The kitchen window behind her was throwing that thin Ohio autumn light across the room, enough to show every dust line on the top shelf and every mark in the old oak floorboards near the pantry door. Nell used to call this the honest light because it made everything show itself. Outdated, I said. Brent slid the top folder toward the center of the table. Not in a bad way. It's just restrictive. There are cleaner ways to structure this now. Structure this. As if he were talking about a parking garage. Claire gave me a patient little smile, the kind nurses use on men who don't want to keep the heart monitor leads on. Dad, we're trying to help. I looked at the folder but didn't open it. 4 months before she died, Nell had stood in the pantry doorway with a grocery list in one hand and said, Your daughter's husband talks about this house like it's a line item. She'd smiled when she said it because that was her way with hard things at first. Then she'd added quieter, Don't let anybody tidy me out of this family after I'm gone. I hadn't forgotten that. I hadn't forgotten much. Claire started putting food on plates without asking what anybody wanted. When she got to mine, she cut the roast into smaller pieces than she used to. Not tiny, just enough for me to notice. There you go, she said softly. I stared at the plate a second too long. Across from me, Brent rested his fingertips on the folder, as if keeping it from floating off. We've already spoken to a lawyer, he said, just to understand options. A little pulse started in my jaw. We, I said again. Claire gave me that same careful look. Dad, please. Please. Always. Please, right before the knife. It's not a big thing, Brent said. He can walk everybody through the transfer. Transfer. For a second, I honestly thought I'd heard him wrong. The word sat there between the gravy boat and Nell's butter dish, like something dropped from a dirty shoe. Claire set down the serving knife. Dad, no, I said, and I didn't raise my voice. Go ahead, Brent. Transfer what? He leaned back a little the way men do when they think calm belongs to them. Control, primarily. Administrative authority. Not ownership in the emotional sense. That was Brent all over. He could take a knife to a thing and then talk like he was only dusting it. Claire gave me a look that was supposed to be loving and practical at the same time. Nobody's taking anything from you. I looked at the folder again and then at the chair by the window that was still half his by posture, if not by seat. That's interesting, I said, because it sounds a lot like you are. Evan shifted against the counter. Maybe we ought to just eat first. Brent ignored him. Tom, the trust as it stands was written for a different season of life. The language is rigid, and if something happens, I said, I assume you'll all hear about it. Claire blew out a breath through her nose the way her mother used to when a pie crust split at the edge. But Nell's sound had warmth in it. Claire's had management. This is what I mean, she said. You hear one word and get defensive. There it was again. Not what they were doing, how I was receiving it. Same old trick, better clothes. I picked up my fork and cut into the roast she'd already cut for me, smaller than necessary. It tasted fine. She'd over-salted the potatoes. Brent reached for the pepper before he'd taken a bite, like he always did. And that bothered me more than it ought to have, because I remembered Nell once laughing in this same room and saying, "A man who seasons food before he tastes it came to dinner already decided." At the time, Brent had laughed too. He was still courting his way into the family then, back when he called me Mr. Mercer. Back when he came over in rolled-up sleeves and asked questions about the deck I'd built, as if lumber and joists were some respectable foreign language. That was before he got his promotion at the bank, before he started talking about legacy planning and asset strategy and using the word footprint for houses people lived in. Claire folded her napkin once, twice exactly square. "Dad, this isn't about your feelings." That one landed harder than the first two. I looked at her face and saw, all at once, the little girl who used to stand in the garage doorway in rain boots while I sharpened mower blades. And the woman sitting across from me now with her blouse pressed neat and her wedding set catching light while she explained my own life back to me. "Seems to involve them some," I said. Brent slid the folder open. The paper sound in that room made my shoulders tighten. "If you'd just let us walk you through it, you'd see this is protective. It creates continuity. It avoids confusion later." "Whose confusion?" His eyes flicked up to mine, and there it was. Not pity. Irritation. Claire jumped in before he answered. "Dad, nobody is saying you can't still be involved." "Still be involved." I set the fork down. "When your young people insult you straight if they mean to. Later on, especially once your hair goes white, they start wrapping it in options. You can still be included. You can still be consulted. You can still have your wishes heard. Every one of those stills means somebody already moved your name out of the center." I'd known that feeling before. Not exactly this version, but close enough to make my chest go cold. My own father had a voice made for gravel roads and bad news. He was a feed store man, red hands and tobacco teeth, and he believed some sons were born for talking and some for carrying. My older brother, Walt, got taken to county meetings and introduced to bank managers. I got handed the post hole digger and told not to bruise the saplings. Nobody ever called me useless. They didn't need to. They called me dependable. Same effect, nicer coat. Nell had been the first person in my life who heard me all the way through before answering. That's not a small thing when a man reaches 30 before he's had it. She used to say I only sounded quiet because I didn't waste words getting around to myself. Claire knew that. She grew up in that house, hearing her mother say it, which is why this hurt the way it did. Not because strangers were trying to edge me aside. Because my own daughter knew better than to do it this way and did it anyway. Brent tapped a paragraph with his finger. "This section here would simply move authority to Claire as successor acting trustee now rather than later with certain safeguards in place." "Certain safeguards," I repeated. "Yes, for me," I said. "For everyone." That word again. Everyone. A room full of people using the plural to make one man sound unreasonable. Evan finally pushed off the counter. "Claire." She didn't look at him. "What?" "This feels fast." Brent's jaw worked once. It only feels fast because nobody wants to have these conversations until they have to. I turned my head and looked at my son. Evan was still in his work jeans, probably came over straight from the body shop. He had grease under one thumbnail and that sheepish, caught-between expression he'd been wearing since I walked in. He and Claire had never moved through family the same way. Claire entered rooms like they were hers if she was prepared enough. Evan entered like he was checking whether he was in anybody's way. "Did you know about this?" I asked him. He took a breath. "Claire said you all needed to go over trust stuff." "Transfer stuff," Brent corrected. Evan's eyes shifted to him, then back to me. That was answer enough. Claire gave a little laugh that had no joy in it. "You're making this sound ugly." "No," I said. "You're making it sound tidy." The room went still. Even the vent cut off. Claire lowered her voice. "Dad, we have all watched you struggle since Mom died. There are some sentences that open one door and close another. That was one of them." I looked at her and waited. "With the yard," she said. "The paperwork, bills, you forget things." "I forget things." "Yes. Like what?" She opened her mouth and then didn't say anything. Brent filled it for her. The property tax notice in May. I paid it, late, by 6 days, Claire pressed on. And you missed that appointment with Dr. Kessler. I moved that appointment because your husband scheduled an insurance man here the same afternoon without asking me. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. Brent's tone went flatter. Tom, no one is questioning your character. There it was. Another one of those sentences that means the next thing will do exactly that. I looked down at my plate. The gravy had run into the potatoes. Claire used to hate when food touched. Nell always told her the table wasn't a blueprint. Then I saw it clear, not all at once, but clear enough. This wasn't about the tax notice, or the doctor, or the grass along the fence line getting high before I got to it in June. Those were just pegs, handy little pegs to hang a larger story on. A story in which I was becoming uncertain and they were becoming necessary. And the larger story had an address, this house. Not just the house itself either, though. Lord knows Brent had asked enough questions about it these past 10 months. Market timing, restrictive language, liquidity, sensible use. He talked about this place like it had one heartbeat, and that was resale. The thing that changed the room for me was smaller. It came back in Nell's voice. 3 months before she died, sitting right where Brent's papers were now, she had pushed her reading glasses up on her head and said, "If anything happens to me first, promise me you won't let them touch the church fund." At the time, I'd said, "Who's them?" And she'd smiled that tired little smile. Sick people get when they don't have energy left for pretend. Claire doesn't mind generosity in theory, she said. She just hates it when it isn't efficient. The church fund. That's what she called it, though. It wasn't exactly that. It was a charitable bequest tucked into the trust for the county food pantry and the church repair fund over in Ashford, where her daddy had laid brick as a young man. Not a fortune, but enough to matter. Enough that Brent had once asked too casually by half whether old bequests like that ever got revisited when family circumstances evolved. I hadn't liked the question then. I liked it less now. I lifted my eyes to the open folder. Brent had turned one page sideways for easier reading. In the margin, I could see a line under one paragraph, Amendment to Distribution Priorities. There were words farther down I couldn't fully make out from where I sat, but I didn't need all of them. I saw enough. Charitable allocation, reduced. And below that, in the next section, language about authority over sale and disposition of residential property. A funny thing happens when hurt goes on long enough in one sitting. It burns through and leaves something colder behind. "You're not trying to make things easier for me," I said. Claire's chin lifted. "We are." "No." I looked at her, then at him. "You're trying to get around me." "That's ridiculous," she said too quickly. I could have still stopped then. Ate the meal, let them talk. Let myself keep pretending this was Brent pushing and Claire following, because she hated friction less than she hated feeling unsophisticated. I could have protected the softer version of her a little longer. That is the trouble with family. Sometimes the lie you keep alive is the last warm thing in the room. But then Claire did something small. She reached over and straightened the top page with the back of her fingernail, neat as you please, and said, "Dad, Mom put a lot of things in place when she was sick. Some of them were emotional decisions. Emotional decisions about Nell, about the trust, about the house she scrubbed, painted, planted, and held together with me through layoffs and flu seasons. And one bad winter when the furnace went out Christmas week. I felt something in me go still, not loud. Still, that was the cost of it, I think. Right there. Not anger. Not yet. The losing of one last excuse. This wasn't Brent leading Claire by the elbow through a language she'd borrowed from him. Claire knew exactly what she was doing. I pushed my chair back. Slow. The legs made a dull scrape on the floorboards Nell and I had refinished by hand in 1998. Brent's eyes narrowed. "Tom, there's no need to make this adversarial." I looked at the phone on the wall by the pantry, then back at him. "Let's ask Arthur," I said. Brent gave a short laugh through his nose. Arthur Bell. I was already at the wall phone. It hung where it had hung since 1986, just inside the pantry door, though the cord had been replaced twice and the handset once after Nell dropped it mopping and cracked the mouthpiece. We all had cell phones. Claire probably thought that old kitchen phone stayed there because I was stubborn. Truth was, I liked a thing that lived where you left it. I took the receiver down, pressed the speaker button, and dialed from memory. Nobody spoke while it rang. That was the first shift in the room. Small, but I felt it. Up until then, they'd been filling every silence before I could use it. Now they were listening. Arthur picked up on the third ring. Bell. Arthur, it's Tom Mercer. His voice changed the way decent men's voices do when they hear strain and choose not to name it right off. Tom. Everything all right? I looked at the table, at Claire's folded hands, at Brent's folder still lying open, at Evan standing half-turned toward the back door like a man in a garage who just smelled fuel and hadn't found the leak yet. I've got family here for Sunday lunch, I said. And apparently we're discussing a transfer of trust authority. A beat. Then Arthur said, very even, I see. Brent leaned forward. Mr. Bell, this is Brent Delaney, Claire's husband. We're just trying to walk through next steps in a constructive way. Arthur did not answer him first. He answered me. Tom, he said, do you want me to clarify the current structure of the Mercer Family Trust as amended on June 10th of this year? There are moments when a room changes temperature without a window opening. Claire's eyes flicked to me so fast it almost looked like pain. Yes, I said. I do. Arthur cleared his throat softly. As of June 10th, under the amendment you executed in my office, after a private review of all relevant provisions, you remain sole acting trustee during your lifetime, unless you yourself choose to resign in writing or are adjudicated incompetent by the standard outlined in the instrument. No such adjudication exists. No transfer has occurred. No transfer is pending. No successor authority activates simply because family members would prefer an administrative change. Nobody moved. I don't mean that figuratively. Nobody moved. The vent kicked on above my chair and you could hear the motor whine for a second before the air started. Brent found his voice first. There may be some misunderstanding. There is not, Arthur said, still calm. I'm looking at the amendment now. Claire turned toward me. You changed it. That question might have sounded shocked to somebody else. To me it sounded offended, as if the deeper wrong was not what she'd tried to do, but that I had acted without asking permission from the people arranging to replace me. Yes, I said. When she asked, Arthur just told you. She stared at me. June. The month I'd paid the tax bill 6 days late because I had spent 3 afternoons at the county hospital with a man from my VFW post whose son lived in Phoenix and talked big on the phone but never came. June, when Claire called twice to remind me to trim the hedge as if I couldn't see it from my own kitchen window. June, when Brent sent over a brochure from some senior transition outfit in Columbus folded to the page about simplifying legacy properties. Arthur went on. Tom met with me alone. We reviewed capacity. We reviewed intent. We reviewed the bequest language and the residential property restrictions specifically because he wished to preserve them. Brent had gone pale in a way that made his ears look too pink. Tom, if this is some sort of emotional reaction to... Arthur spoke over him, and that was the second shift. I had never heard anyone speak over Brent in my house before. Mr. Delaney, Arthur said, for the sake of clarity, your prior emails to my office about weakening restrictions on sale of the residence and reducing charitable allocation were received and retained, but no action was taken on your suggestions because you had no authority to request such changes. Evan let out a breath, sharp enough to hear. Claire looked from the phone to Brent and then back to me, and for one quick second, I saw something like panic in her. Not because she'd been caught wanting something, because she'd been caught wanting it under the wrong name. My emails weren't requests, Brent said. They were hypotheticals. Arthur answered him the way a hammer answers a nail. They were inquiries seeking flexibility contrary to the expressed intent of both settlers as repeatedly communicated. Both settlers, Nell and me. I went to the buffet drawer and pulled out the yellow legal pad I'd folded there after my last meeting with Arthur. My own handwriting stared back at me in block letters, dark and ugly from the cheap pen I'd had in my shirt pocket that day. Keep house protected. No sale without my written consent. Keep pantry/church fund in place. Do not let them call grief confusion. I set the pad beside Brent's folder. I did not slam it. I just laid it there. Somehow that felt heavier. Claire looked down at the page and then away as if the sight of my handwriting embarrassed her. "You wrote that," she said quietly. "I did." Her mouth tightened. "Dad, this doesn't mean we were wrong to worry." That was when I understood legal proof would not be enough. She could still try to live inside that sentence. She could still try to make this into concern expressed imperfectly. If I let the room close on that, then all Arthur had done was prove I had won paper. It wouldn't answer what they had done to me in this house. I walked back to the table and put my hand on the back of my own chair by the window. This, I said, wasn't worry. Claire's face hardened the way glass does when the light leaves it. "You have forgotten things." "So, have you?" I said. "You forgot whose chair that is. You forgot whose house this is. You forgot who taught you the difference between helping and taking over." "Dad." "No, Claire. I hadn't raised my voice all afternoon, and I didn't raise it then. But I said her name the way I used to when she was 12 and about to cross a road without looking. It stopped her. The ugly part isn't that you wanted the trust changed," I said. "Ugly's been in families since Cain and Abel. The ugly part is how you went about it. You sat me at the end of my own table. You cut up my food. You talked to me like I was halfway gone before I'd even sat down." Her eyes flashed wet. But I was too old to be moved by tears that arrived only after the record did. Brent tried once more. "Tom, nobody is saying you're incompetent." I turned to him. "That's exactly what you were trying to say without having to say it plain." He opened his mouth. "No," I said. "You don't get to tidy this up now. Not in my house." Another silence. A real one this time. Not waiting, not staged. Arthur's voice came from the phone steady as a fence post. "Tom, do you want me to outline the consequences of any future effort to pressure a transfer contrary to the amendment?" I kept my eyes on Brent. "Yes," I said. Arthur did. He laid it out in clean sentences. Any attempted circumvention would fail. Any formal challenge would require evidence, not impressions. Any misuse of documents or coercive execution would expose the parties involved to legal consequences and costs. He did not sound dramatic. That made it better. Better and final. By the time he finished, Brent had gone from pale to gray. Claire stared at the tablecloth. Evan was looking at me in a way I hadn't seen since he was 19, and I changed a tire for him in a freezing rain off Route 33, and he realized halfway through that I wasn't as tired as he'd thought. I thanked Arthur. He said to call him tomorrow. Then he was gone and the phone line clicked dead. Nobody reached for the roast. Claire finally spoke, but the shine had gone out of her voice. "We were trying to make things manageable." I sat down in my own chair. "For who?" I said again. She didn't answer. Brent closed the folder at last. That sound paper coming shut was the nearest thing to satisfaction I'd heard all day. Evan set his Coke down. "It felt decided before Dad came in," he said. Claire looked at him startled. "Evan." "No," he said. And for once there was no hesitation in him at all. It did. That was all he gave me, but it was enough. Not because I needed rescuing. Because truth sounds different when it stops being lonely. Claire got up first. She took her purse from the hall chair and stood with it hanging from her shoulder like she'd arrived somewhere by mistake. Brent gathered the papers, not looking at me. He left one page behind and came back for it, which would have pleased me more if it hadn't made me so tired all at once. At the door, Claire paused. I thought maybe she would say she was sorry. Not because I believed it would mend much, just because people do sometimes surprise you, even after they've disappointed you. Instead, she said, "You should have told me." I looked at her standing in the doorway. Nell had painted herself one summer in old denim shorts and a Reds t-shirt with white paint on the hem. "I did," I said. "You just stopped hearing me." She flinched at that. Good. Some truths ought to leave a mark. Then they were gone. Evan lingered. "You okay?" That is one of the few questions in life that usually means more than the words. I looked at him, grease still under his thumbnail. His shoulders still carrying that old apology he'd been born with. "I will be." He nodded. He wanted to say something else. I could see it. But some men in a family are better at staying than talking, and some are better at leaving before they say the wrong thing. Evan put a hand on my shoulder once quick, then headed out. After the cars pulled away, the house changed back by degrees, not all at once. First the quiet, then the little clock over the stove, then the settling creak from the hallway floor where the boards always gave back the day's weather near dusk. The roast sat on the platter, drying at the edges. The gravy had skinned over. I cleared the table slowly. Brent's chair went back where it belonged, which was nowhere near mine. I washed Nell's blue-rimmed butter dish by hand and dried it with a good towel. Then I took her chipped coffee mug from the cabinet, the white one with the faint brown line inside that never quite washed out, no matter how much she soaked it. I filled it with what was left in the pot, though the coffee had gone lukewarm. Then I stepped out onto the back porch. The evening had come soft and gold, with that Ohio fall smell of dry leaves and cooling dirt. The maple tree Nell planted moved just a little in the breeze, not enough to call it swaying, just enough to show it was alive. I sat down in the porch chair and held the mug in both hands. From there I could see the yard. The fence lined the patch near the shed where the grass still came in thinner because of that bad ice storm 8 winters ago. I could see the kitchen window above the sink. I could see my own reflection faint in the glass if I looked at it from an angle. I thought I might feel triumph. Men imagine they will, I guess. Especially after they've been pushed and finally pushed back the right way. What I felt was steadier than that. Better, too. Not joy. Not quite. Relief first. Then something like grief wearing clean clothes. Because I had kept the trust. I had kept the house protected. I had kept Nell's little church fund where she wanted it tucked in there like a hand on the shoulder of people she'd never meet. I had answered the way they'd spoken to me. I had not let them turn my age into a hallway they could walk through. But the cost of a thing does not disappear because you paid it. The sky beyond the maple had gone the pale color. It gets just before dark in October. Not blue anymore, not gray yet. I rubbed my thumb along the seam of Nell's mug and looked out across the yard she loved. For the first time in a long while, the house did not feel like something waiting to be taken from me. It felt defended, and that was enough to sit with while the light went down.